100 years ago this month, two Chicago teenagers tried to pull off what they thought was the perfect crime. As Erin Moriarty of 48 Hours reports, what happened next intrigues us to this day.
Inside a specially designed box at the Chicago History Museum sits a century-old pair of tortoiseshell framed eyeglasses. A chilling reminder, says Paul DeRica, the museum's director of exhibitions, of one of the most troubling crimes in American history, the 1924 kidnapping and murder of a 14-year-old boy in Chicago.
It came seemingly out of nowhere. Americans, sadly, were becoming more accustomed to violent crime, particularly in connection with Prohibition, but not a case like this.
A case that remains just as disturbing today. It happened on May 21, 1924, in the affluent Chicago neighborhood of Kenwood. The killers were 19-year-old Nathan Leopold and 18-year-old Richard Loeb. Both were academically gifted young men. Leopold was about to start law school at Harvard. Both grew up with great wealth and privilege.
You know, one of the most horrible aspects about this case is that from the very beginning, Leopold and Loeb knew that they wanted to kidnap a young person and kill that person. And they were going to develop this kidnap and ransom plot simply as a ruse to throw off investigators. That's what they wanted to get away with, the perfect murder.
The thrill-kill murder of Bobby Franks dominated headlines around the world for months and inspired numerous books, plays, and movies over the years since, including Alfred Hitchcock's Rope.
His body went limp, and I knew it was over.
And then?
Then I felt tremendously exhilarated. How did you feel?
Well, what you're looking at is the Harvard School for Boys. So this was a preparatory school here in Chicago. Bobby had stayed after school to umpire a baseball game.
The victim began his 2-block walk home around 5 p.m. At the same time, says DeRica, Leopold and Loeb were driving through the neighborhood in a rented car looking for a boy, any boy to kill.
Because he wasn't in a group of other kids, it made him kind of a perfect target. But a car pulls up to the side of him, and someone calls out his name, and that person is Richard Loeb.
Bobby Franks knew Loeb. They were distant cousins. He got into the car and was never seen alive again.
I mean, Bobby was just a boy trying to get home.
So how quickly did the whole thing happen?
Oh, within a minute or two.
He's just gone.
He's just gone. He's just vanished.
Investigators believe that Franks was killed immediately. Leopold and Loeb, who had planned the murder for months, discarded the boy's body 11 miles away at an isolated railroad yard. The killers, avid readers of crime stories, later sent a typed ransom note to the Franks' home.
In fact, the ransom note was lifted almost word for word from a story called The Kidnapping Syndicate that had appeared in Detective Story magazine.
Leopold and Loeb, says DeRica, arrogantly thought they'd never be connected to the boy's murder, but they were quickly tripped up by those eyeglasses made by New York optician Almer Coe & Company.
And the unsung hero, if there's a hero in this whole story, is the Almer Coe employee who went through 54,000 records and was able to determine that there were 3 pairs of glasses that matched the prescription, the type of frame, and critically, the type of hinge that was used.
One pair belonged to Leopold, who had dropped the glasses at the rail yard. After a typewriter he owned was tied to the ransom note, he and Loeb were interrogated, and both quickly cracked.
This is the original ransom letter that they wrote prior to abducting Bobby Franks.
That typed ransom letter that demanded $10,000 in unmarked bills, an amount equivalent to $180,000 today, is now part of extensive archives kept at Northwestern University. Kevin Leonard, the university historian, discovered it inside a vault at the law school, along with transcripts of the killer's chilling confessions.
And it is grisly and disturbing reading. I will confess to you, I never finished the confessions because they were so cold. I never got a sense of any remorse there. It was just really difficult for me to read.
But was there anything in there that gave you some sense why these young men would do this?
No, I've never in my own mind been able to resolve that problem. It remains a mystery.
It's not just historians who grapple with that mystery. Do you remember the very first article that you read? Was it a headline? What?
Yeah, it was. Boys admit to murder or something like that. I remember thinking, oh God, that's my great uncle, and good Lord, I'm related to this family.
Ernie Nathan is Richard Loeb's great nephew.
That a relative of mine could kill another person. That bugged me a lot, it really did. All my other relatives on Loeb's side are very nice people. They were civic-minded.
It was shocking to everyone who knew the families. Richard Loeb and Nathan Leopold, seen here alongside their defense attorney, famed orator Clarence Darrow, were examined by countless doctors and alienists, the title used by psychiatrists at the time, trying to understand what drove these teenagers to kill.
They really love to tell the story. They go into great detail with investigators about how the crime was planned, how it was committed. They don't look like people who are particularly concerned about the consequences of their actions.
Every aspect of their lives was dissected, including their rumored intimate relationship.
Well, they had a codependent relationship, and they did push each other to antisocial acts.
Both men pleaded guilty and faced death by hanging, but their lives were saved by Darrow, who argued at sentencing that Bobby Frank's murder could only have been the senseless act of immature and diseased children.
The city wanted them hung, and Darrow got them life in prison instead.
That life sentence ended in death for Loeb, who was murdered by a fellow inmate in 1936. Leopold was paroled in 1958.
I hope all of you feel that a third of a century spent in prison has been severe punishment and are happy to see me free.
To this day, the motive remains elusive. Why did they do it? Ernest Nathan believes neither Leopold nor Loeb would have committed the murder on his own. You say when the two, Leopold and Loeb, got together, they became
A third person, yes. This Anna, the boy's mother, this young Richard.
2 years ago, Ernest Nathan donated his family's personal papers to Northwestern University, including this letter Richard Loeb wrote his parents from prison. Dear Momsy and Popsy, this thing is all too terrible. I've thought about it,
and even now, I don't seem to be able to understand it. I just can't seem to figure out how it all came about.
I mean, he leaves the Harvard School, and he's really just like about 2 blocks away from his house.
For the past 16 years, Paul DeRica has been offering walking tours of the Kenwood neighborhood, always stopping at the home where Bobby Franks once lived.
What always gets lost in the story is Bobby, the victim. In a strange and unsettling way, it might suggest that we're more like Leopold Loeb than we would like to be. They wanted to pull off the perfect crime, and they didn't pull off the perfect crime, but they did commit a memorable one, and we're still talking about them a century later.